All right, so today we're diving into something a little different.
Yeah.
We're going to be looking at crisis preparedness.
Okay.
Specifically, we've got this document that the Swedish government has put out
Mm-hmm.
called In Case of Crisis or War.
Interesting.
It's a brochure that they're sending to every household in Sweden,
Wow.
and it's available in multiple languages
Oh,
and
wow.
formats. So they're really trying to make sure that everybody has access to this information.
That's interesting in and of itself, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
that they are taking this seriously,
Yeah.
that they're putting this out there.
Yeah, it's a pretty clear signal, I think, that, the world's a bit of a tense place right now.
For sure.
And Sweden is, maybe not in the most volatile region, but they're certainly taking
Ah.
it seriously, and they're being very upfront with their citizens about the potential for things to
Yeah.
go sideways.
And I think it speaks to this idea of total defense,
Hmm.
which has been a cornerstone
Hmm.
of Swedish strategy since World War II.
Right,
That it's not just about military might,
right.
but it's about everybody being involved in national security.
Yeah.
The government,
Hmm.
businesses and individuals all have a role to play. And what's really interesting
Okay.
is that this total defense duty applies to everyone between the ages of 16 and 70 in Sweden,
Wow.
including foreign nationals.
So even if you're just visiting,
And if you're just visiting, you've got to be ready to
You're-
pitch in.
you're in it.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's not just about having a bunker in your backyard.
No.
It's about everybody having a role. But let's get practical. Does this brochure actually, tell people what to do
Absolutely.
in a crisis?
Yeah, it's got really detailed checklists. It talks about everything from
Okay.
home supplies to understanding what those air raid sirens mean.
Okay, let's start with home preparedness.
Okay.
What are some of the things that they suggest people have on hand?
Well, they cover the basics, right?
Yeah.
Water, food, first aid, a radio flashlight.
Sure.
But what's interesting is the reasoning behind some of the specifics.
Okay.
So for water, they recommend 3 liters per person per day.
Okay.
And they even suggest freezing water bottles, which I thought was really clever.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Yeah, because it acts as both an ice pack if the power goes out,
Right.
and then also you have a source of drinking water.
That's smart.
So it's kind of a 2-for-1.
What about food? What do they recommend having on hand?
So they emphasize non-perishable, high-energy foods that are easy to prepare.
Okay.
So, things like grains, canned goods, protein sources like beans or lentils, even a bit of chocolate.
Oh, nice.
For an energy boost, it's all about practicality and nutrition when your routine is disrupted.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, what about staying in the loop during a crisis? What do they say about communication?
We'll ditch the smartphone,
Okay.
grab a battery-powered or hand-crank radio.
Okay.
They specifically recommend tuning into Sverige's Radio P4,
Okay.
which is their official emergency broadcast channel. And then they also suggest, the old school tactic of writing down important phone numbers.
Yeah.
Just in case cell service goes out.
Right back to basics, pen and paper.
It is.
Now, what happens if things escalate and, evacuation becomes necessary? Do they have a plan for that?
Yeah, they've got a checklist for your go bag
Okay.
with essentials, ID, cash, medicines, warm clothing.
Right.
But here's the kicker. They recommend packing a map and compass,
Oh, wow.
which is kind of a sobering reminder
Yeah.
that in a true crisis, your GPS might not be so reliable.
Yeah, really a reality check in the digital age.
It is.
Okay, now we've all heard about Sweden's vast network of public shelters.
Yes.
What does the brochure have to say about those?
It clarifies that everyone has the legal right to access the nearest shelter during a crisis.
Everyone.
I mean, everyone.
Okay.
These shelters are marked with a special symbol, a blue triangle, inside an orange rectangle.
Okay.
And you can actually find their locations on the Swedish Civil Contingencies Agency's website.
Oh, wow. So they've really mapped this out.
They have.
But let's get real for a second here. The brochure mentions air raids. That's a pretty intense scenario to be prepared for. So what's the deal with that?
Well, that's where those siren warnings come in.
Okay.
They clearly explain what each siren means
Right.
and what you should do.
Okay.
So you've got the public service announcement, which is for general emergencies.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's the emergency alarm, which signals a heightened state of alert.
Okay.
And then, of course, the air raid warning.
I'm guessing you don't want to ignore that one.
Not at all. Short bursts for a full minute mean you need to seek shelter immediately.
Okay.
Ideally, that's a civil defense shelter, but any underground space,
Right.
like a cellar, a garage, even a metro station, will offer some protection.
Okay, and if you're caught out in the open...
You're going to want to channel your inner groundhog lie flat, preferably in a ditch or a pit.
Oh, wow.
It's all about minimizing your profile and your exposure.
Okay, now for the elephant in the room, the brochure actually mentions nuclear threats.
It does.
That's a heavy topic.
It is.
Maybe including in something that's going out to every household.
Well, it's a reflection of the times we live in,
Yeah.
and they're not shying away from it. They explain that the risk of nuclear weapons being used has unfortunately increased.
Okay, so what's the advice? Like, is there even a way to protect yourself in that kind of situation?
Well, the key is still seeking shelter immediately,
Okay.
preferably in a designated civil defense shelter.
Right.
They also point out that radiation levels decrease significantly within days.
Okay.
So while it's a terrifying prospect, there is a focus on survival.
Right. It's good to know there's at least some hope.
Yeah,
But it's not just about physical threats, is it? The brochure also mentions this concept of psychological defense.
that's right.
That sounds like something out of a spy movie.
It kind of does, doesn't it?
What does it actually mean?
Well, think of it as a way to combat information warfare. It's about recognizing that in times of crisis, foreign powers might use disinformation and propaganda
Right.
to try to sow discord and undermine trust.
So it's about being aware of, fake news and propaganda, especially in this heightened state of anxiety.
Exactly.
So what's the advice there?
Well, they encourage people to be critical of information that they encounter, especially online.
Okay.
Double check sources, look for official government channels,
Mm-hmm.
and think twice before sharing anything that could be misleading or false.
Right. So don't let fear and uncertainty make you vulnerable to manipulation.
Exactly.
And alongside that comes digital security, which is becoming more and more crucial these days.
Absolutely.
What do they say about that?
They warn about cyber attacks on critical infrastructure during crises,
Okay.
and they encourage everyone to take steps to protect their own devices and data.
So it's a double whammy, protect yourself from misinformation and cyber threats, all while dealing with this potential crisis.
That's right.
Okay, so what kind of practical advice do they give?
Strong passwords, being wary of suspicious links,
Mm-hmm.
keeping your software updated, backing up your important data.
Right?
It's all about minimizing your vulnerabilities, no matter what the specific threat is.
So this isn't just advice for tech wizards.
No, not at all.
This is something everybody needs to be thinking about these days.
Absolutely.
What about something more immediate, like a terror attack?
Sure.
Do they have any guidance on how to respond to that?
They advocate the run, hide, tell approach,
Okay.
which is a strategy that's recognized globally for these situations.
Can you break that down a bit?
Sure. So run means putting as much distance between you and the danger as possible.
Okay.
Hide means finding a safe place to conceal yourself if escaping isn't feasible.
Right.
And tell means alerting the authorities, calling emergency services as soon as it's safe to do so.
Okay. Simple, but potentially life-saving.
It is.
We've covered a lot here. Water, food shelters, air raids, even nuclear threats.
Oh, it's a lot to think about.
What other types of emergencies does this Swedish preparedness guide address?
Well, Sweden's no stranger to extreme weather.
That's true.
So they have a whole section on preparing for things like heavy rain floods, heat waves, forest fires.
So it's not just about prepping for war,
No.
but for the realities of a changing climate as well.
Exactly. Check local risk assessments, have a plan for power outages and water shortages, stay informed about weather warnings,
Mm-hmm.
and be extra careful with fire during dry periods.
Right. It's about recognizing that threats can come from multiple sources.
They do.
Okay, so they got the physical environment covered. What about health threats?
Okay.
Anything about pandemics, disease outbreaks?
Well, they do address pathogens.
Okay.
They remind people that infectious diseases can spread rapidly and cause major outbreaks.
Right.
While they don't focus on any specific disease,
Sure.
they emphasize the importance of following recommendations from government agencies to reduce the spread.
Okay, solid advice, especially considering what the world's been through recently.
Yep.
But what about people who might need extra help in an emergency?
Sure.
Do they address accessibility at all?
They do. They have a section specifically for individuals with special needs.
Okay.
It highlights the government's commitment to providing support
Mm-hmm.
and encourages people to create personalized crisis and emergency plans.
Okay.
They even mention practical things like using accessibility features on your phone to receive information,
Right.
ensuring that service animals are allowed in shelters.
Okay.
So it's really good to see that inclusivity is a priority in their preparedness efforts.
Yeah, that is encouraging.
Yeah.
What about pets?
Pets.
Do they have any advice for pet owners?
Oh, they definitely haven't forgotten about furry friends.
Okay.
They remind pet owners that they're responsible for their animal's well-being during a crisis.
Yeah.
Recommend having enough food and water on hand for at least a week.
Okay.
Having a cage or carrier for transportation.
Right.
Keeping vet contact info and pet ID numbers readily available.
It's the kind of thing you might not think about until you're in that situation.
Exactly.
Now, all this talk about potential crises can be pretty anxiety-inducing.
Understandably so.
Does the brochure acknowledge the mental and emotional toll
Oh, they do.
these threats can take?
They dedicate a section to mental well-being,
Okay.
offering tips on managing anxiety and stress,
Okay. Like what?
talking to loved ones or professionals,
Mm-hmm.
helping others prepare,
Okay.
taking care of your physical health,
Right.
limiting your news exposure are all encouraged.
Right.
They also emphasize seeking professional help if anxiety becomes overwhelming.
Sure.
So it's a good reminder that preparedness isn't just about stocking up on supplies.
Right.
It's about taking care of your mental and emotional well-being too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But what about kids?
Kids, yeah.
How do they suggest talking to children about these potentially scary topics?
They have a section on just that they advise open and honest communication in age-appropriate language. They suggest listening to children's concerns without overwhelming them with details.
Right.
And planning fun activities can also help kids cope with stress,
Okay.
shift their focus away from anxieties.
So it's about striking a balance,
Yeah,
being truthful without creating unnecessary fear.
exactly. And maintaining familiar routines as much as possible
Mm-hmm.
can provide a sense of stability and normalcy during chaotic times.
Right. So create that sense of security even when everything around you feels uncertain.
Exactly.
We've certainly gone deep on this Swedish preparedness brochure.
We have.
It covers a wide range of scenarios, from basic supplies to nuclear threats to talking to your kids about war.
It does. And
Yeah.
it really highlights the seriousness with which the Swedish government
Yeah.
is approaching these potential threats.
Yeah.
And they're providing people with concrete steps to take,
Right.
not just vague warnings.
And it's significant that they're distributing this to everyone regardless of nationality. It's like saying, look, if you're in Sweden, we're all in this together.
We are.
And that raises an interesting question now that we've seen how Sweden is approaching preparedness. What steps can we take to improve our own readiness in the face of uncertainty?
That's a great question to ponder.
And for our listeners who are curious to learn more, we'll be exploring some additional insights
Okay.
from this Swedish preparedness guide in the next part of our deep dive.